Okie doke. Thank you very much. All right, shall we move on to the next audit?
Audit New Zealand.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'll now invite Chantel Grunsky to present on behalf of Audit New Zealand, please. Morning.
Morning. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
So similar to what Bruce has said, we're not here to fetter your process whatsoever, but we have to work through any amendments that happen to the LTP. Our opinion is based on the document that would be presented for adoption on Thursday. Currently, we've reviewed your LTP as it stands, and we would be comfortable approving in its current state. If there were amendments above a $1.5 million movement today, we would have to do work to determine whether or not they added to the misstatement schedule that will be included on the LTP. This is based on the fact that there is already some errors that are sitting on your misstatement schedule, which relate to the Wakakatahi funding. And those are between 2024 and 2026, and they range between $10 million and nearly $14 million.
Is that it?
I can say more, or
Good work.
there could be questions.
Right, we have a couple of questions. Now, one thing I'm just going to say about questions. I talked to MP, I shouldn't say old MP, Margaret Austin, but she is old because my wife went to her 90th birthday. Now, she said to me a while ago, if a question cannot be asked in one sentence, then it is not a question. So, now, I'm not directing that at you, I'm directing that. Okay, so Councillor Templeton, please.
Thank you. So yesterday we were informed that our leeway for making changes was around 30 million total. You've just said 1.5 million. What's the difference there?
So the difference is the 1.5 million is the trivial threshold. So anything below 1.5 million, we wouldn't have to do any further work on.
Okay.
It would mean that your LTP is materially consistent with what has been audited.
Yeah.
Anything above the 1.5 million, we have to do further work through. So we have to, because the LTP, and Feed can chip in as we go, because the LTP in the model cannot within the 2 days be amended for your amendments today, effectively those would reflect as misstatements in what is adopted on Thursday.
So is this like previous years where anything sort of in that not immaterial but not huge,
Yes.
just gets a bit of a workaround just to run a few things and then we adopt on Thursday? So anything, so $3.5 million, for example, on a project, a little bit in year one, some in year two, would just be part of the 2-day turnaround?
It could be fine, but if we have 5 of those, that could cause a problem. Because what we do is there's a cumulative and sort of individual, and because you've already got quite a large sum already sitting on your misstatement schedule, 3 or 4 $3 million plus your trivial could take you over material limit, which means that there's work that I need to do to work through that basis, or your model will need to be updated for those, and then that would remove the misstatement. Management can talk to how long sort of any updating to the model for amendments would need to take.
So process-wise today, if we went through all of the amendments, at the moment it's sounding like the latter ones would struggle the most because people would be starting to worry about materiality. But if we went through all of them to see what we want, and then if it went over, we could go back potentially and reprioritise. Is that a process that could happen?
That's your process.
Yeah,
So
but we could.
whatever was resolved at the end of the day is what we would look at to determine whether or not there's any impact to the model.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Kewen, please.
Yeah, so 1.5, is that CapEx or OpEx or in total add-ons? And is it per add-on or cumulative?
It would be per line item. So, for instance, rates is the one that is generally affected the most. So, what we would look at is so any ups on rates and downs on rates would be taken into account, and that net impact would have to be less than 1.5 million. And then whatever contra was, so each of those line items, if it's OPEX, would need to be less. If it was CapEx, it would need to be less. So there is the ability for you to have much smaller differences on OPEX and CapEx because the impact on rates is probably the most significant.
Thank you. Councillor Johansson, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your advice. I'm just looking at this sheet that we've been given with the changes, amendments, corrections between the consultation LTP and the current proposed LTP. And there's about, there's quite a lot. Like there's, 25, 26, $27 million of changes. So I'm just wondering, you didn't refer to it. None of the transport ones are on the list apart from some craft ones and a few minor things and tens of thousands. But where's the
That's
traffic?
a question. Go, mate.
Right. Where's the information that we can see as to what the concerns are that you have around the transport and the changes?
Do you want to answer that? The difference on the misstatement schedule. So that's been supplied to management in terms of effectively what happened is Waka Kotahi has come back with indicative funding on the transport program for your continuous program. And what is included in your judgments and projects is different to what the indicative numbers are that have come from Waka Kotahi. Those have not been updated in the current LTP.
And Your Worship, through if I could speak to that, and the reason is that we had an arrangement that we would provide to Audit New Zealand by the 7th of June, an updated model. So the whole model from what had been audited for the consultation document and all of the supporting documents.
Just proceed.
No, done again.
Had all of the information had to be supplied. We supplied that on the 7th, and in fact, over the week, beginning must have been the 4th or the 3rd, we supplied that information through to Audit New Zealand, and we supplied the last lot of it on the 7th. Probably within a few hours, literally only 2 or 3 hours of having provided that information and a fully integrated, updated model, we were then given the NZTA indicative numbers. The challenge we had is that we couldn't then go and redo the entire model and then make sure all of it was updated and correct and then have out for audit and risk by Friday, because it takes us around about 4 to 5 days to fully update the model. We couldn't then go and do that and get a report to the Audit and Risk Management Committee that then had the same information, because we simply didn't have time. So what we had was a discussion with Audit New Zealand where it was agreed that the difference between what we had put into the plan and what we were being advised was our indicative funding was not going to be material. And at that point, it didn't necessitate a change. So that was really, there were just too many moving parts for us to be able to put back together a fully integrated model within that time frame, because we have to go and check a lot of sub-documents, the infrastructure strategy, the financial strategy, various work programs and so on. So that was the reason why, and it was considered not to be material.
Okay, so just to be clear though, the list that we've got for the changes, amendments and corrections has already been considered by Audit New Zealand.
That's correct.
So there's no issue with what's on this list in terms of materiality.
The main difference between what is on what Audit New Zealand have audited and what we're talking about is the NZTA funding, which we got advised of 2.5 weeks ago.
And just
Thank
the
you.
final question from me is around the bit similar to the previous question, but there's a number of amendments that take money from capital endowment fund or out of existing budgets like strengthening communities. So am I right in thinking that because that won't have a rates impact, the materiality isn't as big an issue?
As long as it doesn't have a line item impact. So you've got a build up of rates, but if, for instance, you've got 3.4 million and it's coming out of a current budget, it's just a swap of priorities. That's not significant.
Okay, thank you. Great answer. Councillor Harrison-Hunt, please.
Kia ora. Just a couple of questions. The first one, I just wanted clarity on that 1.5. So that's throughout the life of the project or whatever it is, the life of the line item,
Yeah.
regardless of whether it's now or 2030.
On the income statement, it is each individual year will have 1.5 million.
Okay.
For the balance sheet, it accumulates.
Okay. So if it was, say, balanced out equal to 1.5 over, say, 5 years, would that be
So
enough for you to audit?
if you've got 700 into rates and 700 out of rates, that's fine. The net impact is what we assess
Okay.
from a materiality perspective.
The next question I've got is actually around next year. So there's quite a substantial amount of transport projects being pushed out to the subsequent annual plan, equaling millions of dollars. What does that mean if we are voting to push that out to the next annual plan around materiality and actually it being in order?
So sort of as you go through your annual plans, prioritizations are looked at. If it is adopted for inclusion in the current LTP, there is a lot of work that we'll need to do on that, because pushing projects out is not just about moving $5 million here to $5 million there. There's an inflationary impact that we need to work through. We need to assess capital durability. We need to determine whether or not there's any rating and or debt impact, which then affects your prudence graphs. We need to determine whether or not there's any levels of service implications or any amendments that need to happen to your infrastructure strategy and financial strategy based on statements that have been made already.
That's massive.
Yes.
I see. And the last question is around clarity for those line items. So you're really looking at the new line items, not necessarily the ones that are already in play, correct?
Yes.
Focusing a bit more on the new line items.
I'm saying yes, but it also depends on what the
What it is.
resolution is.
Okay.
So we would need to work through those resolutions. So I can't give you a wholehearted yes, this is absolutely correct, until such time as we get a final
Get a whole
resolution to be able to determine what the impact is going to be.
Great. Thank you so much.
Councillor Templeton.
Kia ora. Two quick questions, probably first for Bede and then the second for you, Chantal. Why weren't we given the indicative funding from Waka Kotahi in the last 2.5 weeks, so that we could have a look at it as councillors and have a greater understanding as we were going into this process?
Yeah, look, I'm trying to think whether there was any communication on that, and clearly there hasn't been. If I can just confer with the team on that as to what happened there. The answer is it would be an oversight because we have been trying to meet the LTP because the numbers haven't changed materially. And we were waiting to get final numbers to determine priorities. The other work of the LTP was continuing is really the essence of it. So it's an oversight. My apologies.
And Chantal, given that the Waka Kotahi funding in itself isn't material, it looks like it does have an impact, though, on the total for a material change to the LTP. So if Waka Kotahi had given us those indicative fundings next week instead of on the 7th of June, would we have more flexibility today?
Yes. So effectively, if they had arrived next week, the information that was being used by council was the most relevant and current information to be able to adopt your LTP. If that information arrived afterwards,
That just is what it is.
it is what it is.
And how much more flexibility would we have today?
$14 million in 2026, 11 and a half in 2025, and about 10 million in 2024.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Coker.
This is more of a general question, I guess. If the public is watching this, what they may be hearing is that when we go through a consultation process and ask them what they want over the next 10 years in the budget for council, that there's actually very little influence that they can have over it. Can you comment on that?
That's not the case at all. So the process needs to be followed. The only reason I'm here talking about it is to explain what the consequences are of amendments that happened today.
No, all right. Councillor Templeton.
Sorry, can I just follow up on that one? Apart from the amendments that are here today, advice that we've been given previously and during some of the workshops we've had sort of held publicly has been that we couldn't make really substantial changes to what we consulted on in the draft because we wouldn't have signalled those to the public beforehand.
Yes, that is the case. So, as you work through your consultation document, what you've gone to the public to consult on provides you with a basis for your resolutions that you pass subsequent to consultation.
Yeah. So, but one of the questions we were asked to make sure we put forward in our consultation document was to ask people what savings they could find within the LTP. But then when there have been some significant savings that people have put forward, we've been given advice that actually we can't do those because we didn't consult on them, if that makes sense. But then we had to ask people if they could find savings. What's a better way of doing that to actually allow people to see the amount of influence they can have?
I think it has to do with the degree of change. So, for instance, and as Bruce mentioned, the significance of those. So if there is something that is of significance that you should be going back to your public on, then that's what you should do. If it comes out and you've got a couple of feedbacks with regards to cost savings that could have a significant impact on your LTP, consideration should be given whether or not those should be considered by your public again. The process that's been followed, as Bede and Michael have said, has been good. There's been a lot of engagement from council. There's been a lot of engagement, record numbers of responses, and we can see that. So all of that taken into account needs to be worked through the LTP. And some of those, if the decision is to resolve for them, require us to do some work. And that's the only thing I'm saying from an audit perspective. I'm not trying to stop the process whatsoever. I'm not trying to influence anyone in terms of the decisions they're making. Yeah. The only thing I'm saying is if there are significant adjustments, audit will require time to work through those.
Thank you. Very, very, very clear. Thank you.
The best way to give our communities the most influence would be to present more options in a consultation document. Yeah, thanks.
Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, hey, thank you for this. I appreciate it's not easy, and you've done a heap of work as a team and worked in with our team pretty well. I just want to go back to the, and probably pick up a bit on what Mel said just around community input, and it's just so I've got it really clear in my mind. So we have the draft LTP in February. We went out for consultation. There was the feedback that came through the consultation. That's been then fed into what we call the Mayor's Recs, but they're not actually Mayor's Recs. They're effectively council consensus, so to speak, through the public workshops. And just to be really clear, they've been audited, haven't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So when we're talking about clearly trivial, it's the additional stuff. It's
It's
the
the
stuff
extra
here,
stuff.
as opposed to the feedback from the community through the consultation. This is above and beyond that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. I just needed to get it clear in my mind before we
Yes.
carry on. Thank you.
We have audited all of what's called the Mayor's Recs.
Yeah. And then we've got the amendments to the Mayor's Recs, and then we've got the additional amendments. But the Mayor's Recs, or the council consensus, so to speak, has been audited already.
Yeah.
So it doesn't fall within that clearly
And
trivial.
we've checked those against the responses that have been received. So what we do is we take the percentage of responses
Yeah.
and we work through to determine whether or not those are in line.
Yeah.
And if not in line, why not?
No, that's great. It just so I was clear in my mind. Thank you.
B, did you have something to add, please?
Oh, look, just back to the NZTO funding, I think it's pertinent to record that had it come a week earlier as well, we would have been able to do something with it. We were simply caught that it arrived literally the same day and hours after we had spent quite a deal of time building the model, making sure everything was correct and integrated, and it arrives. And it's not, when you look at the size of the model, and Chantal's mentioned stuff, it's not possible for us to go back and re-engineer into the whole model those numbers without a lot of effort and a lot of work and a very high level of risk. And the problem we then had, or challenge we're up against, was we had to get the Audit and Risk Management Committee reports out a week later, and they were already well and trained based on what had gone to audit. So I think it's just relevant noting that we really had very little wriggle room once it arrived.
Thank you. Yeah, good. Councillor Moore?
Thank you. It's my first long-term plan, so bear with me. I'm just trying to get my head around why the Mayor's Recs get audited but amendments don't.
Well, I think so when...
It was a timing matter, wasn't it?
Yes, it is. It's that we had the workshops where the guidance was given, and so in order to provide the best information we can, we put that into the model. So they finished on about the 30th of May, I think, and we then started building up, and that was the week that we used to send the information through on the 7th of June. So there has to be a point in time where we stop and we say to audit, you can rely on this information, because otherwise it keeps shifting and they can't freeze the frame in order to get an audit.
Yep.
And so that's where the frame has been frozen. What then, I think, and Chantal will correct me, is you can make adjustments, but those adjustments have to be quite tightly defined, because we don't know what it does to the model, and so you have to be able to provide assurance that they're so immaterial that in actual fact they don't shift the model from what the auditor is issuing their opinion on.
Yeah, so a time issue, so it's not that we couldn't or shouldn't if the
No, and
time's
it has
married
been
up
said,
in future times,
it is a timing issue. So if you really want to do something, then that's the council's choice.
Yeah.
But that's the implications that it flows through. And it probably is a 2 to 3 week process for us then for audit.
Okay, yeah, understood, thank you.
Councillor Harrison Hunt?
Kia ora, B. B, do you have a consolidated number for the amendments rates implications?
Yeah, so, look, that is tricky. But so if we started from the Mayor's Recs, the number positioned up there at 9.95, you got a number there. I mean, it depends what's in and what's out, and that's difficult. But there's probably in the order potentially of somewhere between, well, would it be up to 1%, I'd have thought, of movement. But again, it depends what's in, what's out, and where it's funded from. A lot of them, if they're capex in the year in which the expenditure occurs, is quite small, because the money's borrowed, so it's really the interest cost and so on. Whereas if it's actually expenditure, that is a straight line item in that year. But it's, we did go through the numbers when we did we did go through the numbers at one stage. It was a week or so ago. I think we ended up at about 10.4, but it didn't include rating for renewals and had some other adjustments in and out.
And that's great. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Councillor Moore?
Thank you. So 9.95, so that's around the amount with the Mayor's Recs built in. What is the rough amount without the Mayor's Recs?
Yeah, that would be difficult for us to calculate because there's been quite a few adjustments. For instance, included in the Mayor's regs was that we had taken, because we've got the subvention payment and the effect that has on the borrowings, then
Yep.
we have the CCHL dividend and that and so on, and if that's used to reduce the rate. So outside of the Mayor's regs, there was some of that, like the CCHL dividend. But then when we applied that, we then used some of the CCHL dividend to balance the budget.
Yep.
And give us that. So it would be quite an exercise to go and isolate each of those and say this is what
Yep.
it is.
But would know what the CCHL amount is, would know what the subvention amount is.
Yes, but then we'd have to work through all of those individual amendments, like what we did with the Arts Centre, what we did with the funding, and so on. And so we'd have to work through each of those individually and apply them to the model. And if they came from targeted rates or fees and charges, it all has an impact on the number. So it's where the funding source comes from. For instance, Hagley Park, some of it comes from fees and charges, not all from rates.
Yep.
So that's why it's not, we have to then go and work the model, and this is part of the complexity, is that we have to manage each part individually in order to understand the effect.
Yep.
Thank you, Pete. You all done? Okay, thank you, Chantal. It's very good answers. Thank you very much for all the effort you put in, and everyone, of course. Okay, so we'll now go to the CE and CFO to present